Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode 1 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is a guy who knows a thing or two about physics, but spends his time teaching non-cooperative kids about the SAT, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Hello.
Also with me is a man with a doctorate in epidemiology, but isn't really that kind of doctor, Vincent. Say hi, Vincent.
No, I refuse.
That's for your own good. And finally, we're also joined by John, an aviation engineer who is much too tall for his own good. Say hi, John.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. So for episode 1, we're going to be talking about a book called The Forever War, published in 1974 by Joe Haldeman. And of course, we're going to be talking about the plot of the book in great detail, so you've got to be prepared for some spoilers. So let's jump right into the first topic. So I think that the big hook of the book is the relativity and time travel kind of gimmick. So I wanted to get what you guys thought about about the tech, about is it actually feasible to conduct an interstellar war when there's this kind of general time craziness? I mean, Charlie, you're the physics guy. What do you think?
Yeah, in my relativity class from so many years ago. Yeah, no, I like the idea of it, that especially the idea where it was like, depending on whether you were closer to their planet or your planet, like your sad amount of time it took there meant you were either like way ahead or way behind them technology wise. Like that made sense, and just putting relativity on top of that just like made it even more extreme than it would work like in general.
Right, because essentially the further they are away, they would have to travel. I mean, for those who haven't necessarily read the book, perhaps, they have to travel at near relativistic speeds, right?
Yeah.
And so that would cause a significant time dilation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're like, let's say you're Joe Blow on the alien planet, to get to you, they have a considerable amount of time advantage to develop new technologies, whereas you're on the ship not developing new technologies on your way to attack. Right.
Mm-hmm. Should we briefly explain how time dilation works, just for the casual audience?
I think we should also briefly explain like the plot of the book in case people have no clue what this book is about.
What do you have to explain? There are aliens. We try to kill them.
We try to kill them.
No, I mean, I think the historical context is that like this book was written in the same time basically the Starship Troopers was written, and the premise is very similar. Is that like and I think it's also very similar to Ender's Game. It's like we go travel in space, we meet other species, we can't communicate, we get in a war, and then it's like how is that war different from space in the Starship Troopers compared to Forever War compared to Ender's Game? And this one, like I think the big hook, like you were mentioning, Stavros, is the time dilation factor. Is that technology develops very rapidly, and like you go from like spears and arrows to like nuclear bombs to stasis fields like very, very quickly, whereas Ender's Game is like, oh, you're always in one ship and you always have this little Docker device, and Starship Troopers is always like, oh, I have automatic rifles and I'm shooting bugs. Like technology does not change at all throughout the entire story. But yeah,
it's actually it doesn't. I mean, it makes it seem like it's harder to wrap your head around like what exactly is going on, because and luckily the book doesn't go into such detail where it's like they're traveling X thousand light years at literally X speed. Because it's like it's already hard enough. It's like there's time travel crazy wackiness happening.
Yeah. So the basic idea is like you can't go faster than the speed of light, but the closer to the speed of light you go, the slower your time goes. So like everything to everyone else goes faster. So by the time you actually get there, they've had like many, many more years than you have had to develop new technologies and everything like that.
So here's a question, Charlie, actually. If their planet is a fixed distance from your planet,
yes,
you travel very, very fast to get to their planet, theoretically they would have the same amount of time to develop all their technology, or the faster you travel, even though it's a fixed distance, they have more time to develop technology to fight
even without relativity, think like if it was 1,000 light years away and your ship took off from your planet, they would have 1,000 years before you got there, like at least.
So but it doesn't matter if you travel like faster than the speed of light or slightly below the speed of light. Your amount of time in space and the amount of time they have to prepare for your arrival should theoretically Oh, your time in space should be faster or slower, but their amount of time to defend should be fixed, right?
Yeah, their amount of time to defend is fixed. Where the time dilation comes in is the person on the ship, it's 1,000 light years away, so it takes at least 1,000 years. But to the person on the ship, it will only take like a couple of years because of time dilation. So that's how he manages to, like, the war takes place over thousands of years because of all the constant traveling in terms of real time, but he's only like 5 years older by the end of the book.
Yeah.
So in this case, for instance, if you send like a generational ship at relatively low speeds where their time dilation would be negligible, then both, the enemy and the ship that was attacking will be at nearly the same time. So theoretically, that generational ship could develop new technologies that could, so that when they reached each other, I guess, in battle, there would be near parity, perhaps.
Yeah,
technology, if you assumed that.
In the halfway point, people would be leaving their home planets at the same time, so like technology-wise, they should be about the same, so they'd meet with the same technology. It's as one camp starts pushing towards the enemy planet will have a huge advantage in terms of time research.
So I'm going to coin this here, because I thought about this a lot. And basically, from a tactical standpoint, or not really tactical, from a strategic standpoint, basically, this sort of adds another dimension to any time you want to create hostilities against a distant enemy, essentially. It's sort of like a temporal or some kind of a temporal high ground, essentially. If you're far away, you have a tactical advantage over your enemy in that is very far away, essentially. And to get you any kind of reasonable speed, they have to give up a technological edge.
Yeah, basically, the closer you are to your home planet, the better, because that means you'll have had way more time to develop all your stuff, versus the closer you are to their planet, you'll have wasted all of your time traveling super fast and not having time like on the ship itself. And so you'll get there like 1,000 years later, and they'll just have way better stuff than you because of 1,000 years.
So basically, like, the farther away your target is from your home base, the more screwed you are. Right?
Yeah, and so it's like the closer you are to them and the further away you are from you, like the better it is for them and the worse it is for you. So that's why, like, in the final battle, he's talking about, like, well, who knows what they'll have. Either we'll be really far from them and their stuff will all suck and we'll kill them instantly, or they could be so far ahead in the future that we won't even know what's going on. It will be crazy magic physics from the future.
I mean,
should we call this the getting screwed by time principle, basically?
Yeah,
getting screwed by distance.
You said you're going to coin the term. You're going to coin the term, right, John? What term were you going to coin? It sounded like a huge paragraph that you were coining.
Oh, well, like a temporal high ground, essentially.
Temporal high ground. Okay, John's temporal high ground.
If you're the defender in this case, you're given a huge advantage by being just physically far away in our time-space environment.
That thing's mostly just space, where it's kind of like, imagine if like you had a nation in the US and a nation in Europe and they're attacking each other, but you could only go very slowly across the sea, and so it's like, by the time you got to America, they'd have like tanks and stuff while you're sending like your sad little musket guys.
What? You and winkled yourself in the sea and you fell asleep and you woke up and they were dropping nukes on you?
Yeah. I mean,
this is like the worst game of civilization you've ever played, where you're like, I still have muskets, man.
It's worse than that, though, Charlie, right? Because when you add relativity into the fact, then if you wanted to send the same soldier from America to Europe, right, he would be, if you left in like the 1800s, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but it would be like year 3000 by the time he got to Europe. Yeah. And right? So they would have like flying cars and stuff. He'd have a musket.
And also, that guy would have only experienced like a month, so he won't even know what's going on by the time he shows up and there's like nuclear weapons and planes and all that stuff. He'll just be like sad and confused with his like red coat and musket and thinking everyone's.
That's the temporal low ground, right?
That's this. So if you're, this might be a little bit Machiavellian, but if you think about it strategically, this basically really awards a huge benefit to anybody wanting to commit a first strike. Essentially, the first time you meet anybody in like long distance space, you're basically, that's pretty much your only chance to get a fair fight to essentially wipe them out.
So that assumes that your civilization started at t=0 at the same time. If like our civilization had been established for like millions of years before we met another civilization, and they came at first strike, I think we would probably own them. But vice versa, if like they had been civilized, like established forever, like it's like, Independence Day, we went to the aliens planet in like, Jupiter, like, our Saturn like launch rocket, we had no weapons. They'd be like, we have laser beams and we have like fast and light travel and you're screwed.
Well, you know what you call lower civilizations? You call them
cows?
food.
Yeah.
Food. Oh my god. Okay, so this conversation makes my head hurt. So let's move on to the next topic. There is a lot of weird discussion about sex and sexuality in this book. Right off the start, this guy gets recruited, and it's just like standard military practice just to sack up with the guy next to you or girl next to you, as the case may be. Then later, it just gets into this crazy thing where the entire population of the planet is gay, and then it even transcends that, where just sex at all is weird and disgusting to the crazy clone people at the end. So, what do you guys think of that?
Sounds like my cup of tea.
Well, I think I sent this to you in the email when you asked for our thoughts. Like, the fact that much of that is based off of like population limitations feels like very 70s concerns in terms of like the whole ration war with food feels very much like the oil crisis or whatever. Whereas like in the last 30 years, it feels like the more resources we find, the more we're able to find more resources. I'm sure there's a limit, but it seems like that kind of worry is kind of dated in terms of the population stuff.
Just
It does
population
seem like-
control, you mean, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like a version of population control, but it does seem a little bit more dystopian. Like, if you take a look like China, like where they had major population problems, like they went to like one-child policies before they went to like I find it very hard for China to start promoting homosexuality. Though maybe it's just like my fixed time, like very old-timey, kind of point of view. But it definitely seemed that maybe because homosexuality may have been more like potentially more threatening back then, and like nowadays, depending on who you are, it could be even more threatening to you now than it was in the past. It seemed kind of like this is a very threatening topic, and then they turn it all around, and Joe's like, well, hey, what if this is very mainstream and very accepted by government? I find that very hard to believe.
Mandela is like super tolerant, actually, which is kind of surprising considering when this book was written.
Yeah.
But
I mean, imagine he was my grandpa. Like my grandpa, I don't think would be very tolerant of like homosexuality, especially like if I were homosexual or like my friends were all homosexual.
I think he also just got sent to space and killed a bunch of aliens. So when he gets back, he's just like, okay,
like this is fine. I'm not dying.
Yes,
I guess, but like his, all the family members kind of started dying, and his mom turned homosexual too. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's more than just. I mean, so I think you're right. Like population control is one thing, and he kind of uses that trope as like, that's why people have kind of been encouraged to go homosexual. But it kind of wraps into another topic, which is the kind of parallel to the Vietnam War vets coming back. Not being able to fit in with. He's like, back in my day, we had sex with the other private that was in the cross bunk, but now you just do it with people on the same gender.
Yeah, there's quite a few parallels with I want to say the Vietnam War, which just kind of reflects the age of the book to a large extent. You do see that despondency and unable to fit in when he returns. He doesn't understand the society and how it's grown.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When he returns. But there's also that free love culture that sort of was occurring during the 1970s. So maybe the author thought, an extension of this perhaps would be, if the traditional family or the traditional relationship was sort of maybe breaking down, depending on where you were in that whole counterculture. Perhaps you thought to yourself, okay, well, maybe, in the future people could choose their sexuality. Although I have to say that seems to be like really homophobic to me. So I don't. I mean, that might also be reflective of the 1970s.
It keeps going to the point where it's like later it's not just that. It's like people are now test tube babies, and then in the final thing, they're not even test tube babies. They're all just like infinite clones of the same guy. So it's supposed to be like part of a progression towards like what was socially unacceptable to. It's like now that's just the way it is, and the way it used to be is weird or something.
I mean, I do think that Star Wars brings up a good point, but I think he brings up like three separate points, which are kind of intertwined, but at the same time, I think very separate. Like Star Wars brings up like the point of the Vietnam War, and I think like tied to the Vietnam War is the whole stupidity of the government and the very strange nature of their policies and how war is fought. The second one is the homosexuality thing, which is not so much born out of the Vietnam War per se, but it's definitely like a social kind of cultural thing. And then the final one is like the whole time dilation affecting like how you fit in society. Like if you come back 1,000 years later and everyone is like on Snapchat and Twitter and stuff like that, and you're from like the English 1600s, 1700s, you have no clue what society is all about.
Poor 1700s guy.
Probably the most interesting one to me was like I already feel send no Twitter and stuff like that. I don't have a Twitter account. Like I'm probably gonna have to sign up for one after doing this podcast, but like I'm super far behind in terms of technology, and I'm not even that old, at least in my mind.
Oh yeah.
That's true.
But,
I mean, you know what? I want to really focus on one thing you didn't mention is why does this guy focus so much on sex in this book? Is it just to make it be like how like the sexuality standards have changed for the world? I mean, or is it actually just like an extension of the he just kind of assumed that the free love thing would just kind of keep going into the early 21st century?
I think it's probably a little of both. I think it's just supposed to be like, what would be the next step, then the next step? Because it seems like it is a giant analogy for it's like, I came back and suddenly free love was this thing and like societal standards were totally different. And it's just like, how could you do that with like even larger time passing by?
Yeah, I mean, since I didn't live in the 70s, I think that it might be a reflection of like, what did he think was the most radical thing happening in the 70s, and how could he extrapolate from that into something majorly societally changing? Like, if homosexuality started coming out in the 70s as something like kind of like interesting but very different, like if he thought, oh, well, I'm writing this book, hey, what if I made the entire country? What if I made the entire world homosexual? Like, how would people react to that type of future? It solves a lot of problems with overpopulation and whatnot. So, what if that was the solution?
That's a good point. That kind of brings up to a separate but similar topic, the drug use. So, even the guy comes back. When he gets enlisted, there's marijuana all over the place, and then at the end of the book, bars stock, syringes with presumably Coke or whatever, or heroin or whatever. What you have?
No, Pepsi. It had to be Pepsi.
Is that what that is?
Definitely not Coke. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Pepsi. or maybe they're doing the do. You gotta do the do if you really want to have fun.
But I mean, is that the same thing, where you just hey, people love pot now. I'm sure in the future there'll be space heroin, and everyone will love it.
Oh, space heroin
without any of the consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, because the drugs in the book, they came with some type of a antidote, essentially, that would
that's right,
that would cure you of any of the addiction effects or any of the coming down off the high. So of course it's some magic wonder drug in the future that gives you all those benefits. Again, it's another another artifact of the 1970s, perhaps.
Whatever, that sounds pretty relevant today, and probably
I mean, I can see that the drugs kind of gain more prevalence, but like, what happened to the coffee? I don't think anyone is drinking coffee in the future. Like, I feel like that's probably the most pervasive drug that we kind of get hooked on. I mean, smoking's kind of on its way out, but like, I don't see coffee going anywhere. And
whatever, I'm sure there's still that guy like an Avatar sipping his cup of coffee as they're destroying like sad native people's ancient tree god or whatever.
Isn't coffee mentioned in the book? Like, the officer's mess has the good coffee or something.
I guess, but they didn't make a big deal of it. Not the way that they made out of like the opium or like the syringes of non-caffeinated beverages.
That is true. All right. So let's talk about something slightly different. So actually, I think John, you mentioned the 70s or the Vietnam War mentality. There's this army that makes all kinds of weird, incompetent decisions. So and obviously in this book, it's hey, we're going to an interstellar war. I know. Let's like make all of our best and brightest people become like ground grunts in this crazy space war.
That's right. He's highly critical of the way the U.S. manages its military in the book. I mean, if you read the book and you thought, okay, let's try to apply this to the time when you wrote it, it wouldn't paint a very good picture. Essentially, it's like gross waste of resources, incompetent leadership, you name it. He doesn't think that they're fighting the war very well. And then, at the very end, the book he comes back and they explain to us that, finally they made this clone. And when Mandela tries to understand the war, he tries to ask why. Why couldn't we talk to them? They're a clone race. Why couldn't we talk to them and understand them and be able to communicate a peaceful arrangement with them? And the answer is, you won't understand it, right? That's basically what the book says. You're too simple-minded, Mandela. So I feel like if you were perhaps some soldiers come back from Vietnam might say, why did we lose? Why were we there? What was the point? And there's not really, perhaps, maybe they weren't satisfied with the explanation.
That's true.
Yeah, I was also going to say the whole thing about it started with an attack on a ship that was really dubious beginnings of the war in the first place before even the start of the first battle in the book. I was just that's not subtle.
What is this, Gulf of Tonkin?
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's compare the Army's incompetence in this book to some other IPs, because there's I would say in this book it's very incompetent on the strategic level, which actually reminds me a lot of Starship Troopers, actually. So Vincent, you mentioned Starship Troopers, which you actually mentioned was written around the same time, right?
Yeah, they were written around the same time, and I think they were kind of written from two different perspectives. Starship Troopers was a little bit more rah-rah, war is very patriotic and very, if you haven't even seen the movie, it's you see the propaganda and the slogans. It's war is great, go fight for your country, kill some bugs, be a hero. And then Joe Haldeman's book is much more along the lines of, you sign up for the war, you're going to end up, out of time, stuck out of society, don't have a place to fit in when you come back, and war is run by a bunch of incompetent fools, and what the hell is going on?
It's not just incompetent; it's all-powerful, manipulative, incompetent.
Yeah.
In the Forever War, you mean?
Yeah. It's we're gonna hack your mind and make you into super soldiers. Oh shit, you're the worst super soldier ever. Now that we hacked your mind, let's turn you back to normal. Oops, my bad.
Though I do like how it's let's just have robots do this fight, and it turns out terribly, and it's 500 years later, it's yeah, we got the evidence back on that. It didn't turn out so well, so we don't do that anymore. We just have super test tube babies, and Mandela's just
I think the strategic, the Army and Starship Troopers is also I think they make the same kind of weird tactical missteps where they just send in a bunch of dudes against bugs and they just get crushed.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, but if you compare them, to Starship Troopers, I even think I'm trying to think of armies in science fiction that are incompetent. I always come up with
Stormtroopers.
Well, even worse than Stormtroopers. think of the battle droids from the prequel trilogy of Star Wars.
I refuse to acknowledge that trilogy.
You think of incompetence, at least they're expendable, right? But Forever War just kind of throws people away. So
it throws people and tons of tech and everything. It's they have super spacesuits with finger lasers and all sorts. Also, where's my 90s spacesuit and moon base and finger lasers? I'm sure we'll get to that later.
So my feeling is that with time dilation, you can explain some of that stupidity away, because the amount of intel you get is super dilated by the fact that it's oh, well, they developed all this tech and we have to respond to it, and we didn't get this information until thousands of years in the past. And I feel Starship Troopers doesn't talk about time dilation, and all these other kind of IP science fiction places don't talk about the time dilation, whereas I can kind of come up with a justification for stupidity in terms of strategic decisions, because you're throwing guys in the future, they're not going to get there for 1,000 years, and oops, we sent plasma weapons against a shield that they have defenses against. Well, how was I supposed to know?
Yeah, there's entire generations of strategy sent out that it will take them entire generations just to get the information back that didn't work.
Yeah.
That doesn't even address the full incompetence, though. If you were going to fight a war, would you draft your smartest people to be?
The one reason I thought that was actually pretty smart is because you're sending a bunch of guys with no support or something. They're going out into the future to fight future tech and all that stuff. So Like
They need to adapt.
Chance is probably having smart people who might be able to figure it out on the fly.
Exactly. You need to be on the fly. If you don't have any help from the past, like, you get sent from the Earth at t equals 0, and you're going to arrive in the future at t equals 1,000. If you're stupid to begin with, it's like you send a bunch of monkeys with rocks. They're going to basically act like monkeys with rocks. But if you send human beings and they see, oh my God, these guys, they're not like these guys look like cows. These guys aren't reacting. Oh, I attacked them and nothing happened. I should retreat. What's the science behind this? Let me scan this. Like, if you have smarter people, innately you get better reports back, assuming that they're not like all in, like, full, like Leroy Jenkins, like just kill everything and die in the process, right? So I actually, in the beginning, I would actually send smart people because I need to understand what's going on. Hopefully someone to understand their language. That was actually the other big point about this book, is that, hey, if the problem was that they didn't understand each other and you have time dilation, wouldn't some sort of linguist have thousands and thousands of years to figure out the other species language and then solve the war in the first place? It was more like we got tons of tech, but we never bothered studying them in the first place.
I think that was the point of the whole hive mind thing, was like the war couldn't stop until humans themselves also became a hive mind, because hive mindness involves a certain type of thinking that individual thinking would never accomplish. Like, that's that whole explanation at the end of just like, oh yeah, we fought it and it's over, don't worry.
I guess, but I assume every individual is like a hive.
Yeah.
Like, you could be a hive, I could be a hive. Like, what prevents any one of us understanding a hive, whereas the rest of us maybe wouldn't?
The one thing that you reminded me about with the like weird psychic dog things, like, there's a bunch of psychic people in that first battle.
There were,
like,
yeah, that's
ever
true.
mentioned again?
No, never again. They just died because they killed cows, and then they like had psychic empathy. And
They're psychic enough to be killed by random animals, but not psychic enough to communicate with hive mind alien guys, apparently.
Or use the force.
Yeah, this is very rudimentary, and it also goes to show they did not try very hard. Albeit they explain in the end that they couldn't have understood this hive mind race. In reality, it's not as if they were making an attempt at peace or at some type of a political solution. They talk about how they lost some of the initial ships, and then essentially they sent these folks in to kill them and to take some hostage. When they arrived on the first planet, they didn't even know what the enemy looked like. They had no idea. There's no intel.
That first battle was a chance for peace. Like, they got there, the other guys did not attack them. If they had done nothing, they could have actually like been peaceful with each other. But nope, they had to go and kill them.
I think this speaks to the incompetence topic, where they're just like, we don't even care, just kill them all.
So, Stavros,
incompetent or just exceedingly immoral.
I don't know much. Like, I haven't run any like actual studies of the book. With it being a Vietnam War analogy, is the whole hive mind thing supposed to be a communism analogy?
Oh, you just went meta on this whole thing.
I'm metted out right now.
It could be, but I don't think so much in that, like, communists don't necessarily all think the same.
The idea is like,
social, economic
we
equality.
couldn't communicate with the enemy and figure out that we shouldn't fight them because we were not also communists, and then is that suggesting that we will eventually be communists? I don't know.
I see where you're going with it, Charlie. There's sort of a pseudo-totalitarian, if you think of totalitarianism as sort of a single-directed, it's not really a hive mind, but like a hive with a single queen, or somebody directing all the actions for everybody.
I was just wondering if that was the intent or an interpretation. I don't know, because I was in this for the space.
Yeah. All right, so we're right about out of time. Do you guys have any closing thoughts you want to share?
Well, I already mentioned I want my spacesuit with laser fingers.
Okay, Charlie wants a laser finger. John, what do you think of this? Your closing thoughts?
I give the book, it's a worthwhile read. I think you'll learn something quite a bit about the 70s, but I don't think you're going to be very satisfied. It's not going to make you feel very hopeful.
Was anyone surprised that he got a happy ending in the end with his, love interest and stuff like that?
That was nice. And the woman he had a happy ending with was actually named the same as his actual wife in real life. Mary Gay.
Yeah,
really?
It's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah, because I remember reading it when it was like, oh, she quit years ago. I was like, couldn't you just travel around through space and just wait for him? And then it happened.
Charlie can anticipate the happy endings.
Yep.
All right, Vincent, how about you? Final thoughts.
Final thoughts is, I think in terms of sci-fi, I read sci-fi and I read fantasy mainly because I want to get into the world of someone who thinks completely different from me. It makes me really be like, oh, that was a great idea. What if I did live in a world where the rules were completely different or things were completely done in a very different way? Like, there are only so many, I loved The Lord of the Rings the first time I read it, and then after I read all the high fantasy afterwards, I was like, oh, this is just very derivative. I'm not very interested unless you give me something really different. I do feel like this book is one of those ones where it actually gives you something very different. Like, I read Ender's Game, I had read Starship Troopers, and I was like, oh, well, Forever War is just going to be another book along the same lines, but he actually does a really good job of bringing physics down to a level where it's very interesting and very different, and it makes you think, whoa, what if things did work out that way? So I do give this book 2 thumbs up, however many stars. I don't know if we had to go 5-star rating. I would probably give it like a 4.5. I wouldn't give it a million stars. I mean, there's certain things where they are a little bit people would say, I do agree that people say, oh, well, the government's a little bit stupid. I can't believe it. It's a little catch-22. Like, that book's also kind of ridiculous, but it's award-winning for a reason, because it gives you something to, like, a straw man to really be upset about. And given today's political climate, I think a lot of people are upset with various political situations, and it's very hard to convey that to future generations. And I think he does a good job. So all in all, good job, Joe.
All right.
Yeah.
Stavros, Stavros, what is your feeling about this book, Mr. Moderator?
I had the same kind of reaction where I like it because it does something interesting with the time travel component.
Mm-hmm.
So hard to argue with that when there's general time craziness going on.
Yeah, I really like how it's not just a gimmick. It's a very practical consequence of how would space war work, and then you're just oh, that would totally happen, and it would take forever, and could you even maintain support for a war like that without just going total catch-22 on your planet or whatever?
Yeah, good point. All right, I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today.
So what book are we reading next week, Sal?
Yes, I'll get there.
Or next month.
Let me plug our social media a little bit.
Let the moderator moderate.
Yes, indeed. Listeners, if you have feedback or suggestions, either on what we just talked about or future things we should talk about, books we should read, you can reach us at Subplot A Course podcast at gmail.com or on Twitter at Subplot Podcast. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about A Princess of Mars, and that is by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which I believe is the basis for John Carter. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, it's the John Carter. It's the book that John Carter's based on. Also, he's the same guy who wrote all the Tarzan books.
I think there were 11 John Carter books or something like that, or Princess of Mars books.
Yeah, this is just the first one.
Yeah, this starts them all. Okay, so that's it. Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Don't hang up on me. I'm so lonely.